Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador, thank you for being here to talk trade with us this morning. National security should unquestionably be a priority of any government, but I worry that using national security as a basis for trade restrictions in NAFTA or elsewhere could backfire if other countries do the same to us. In particular, food security for many countries is a vital component of national security. Along that vein, here at home, wheat farmers in my eastern Kansas district are just finishing their wheat harvest, and the work continues to roll north and west across the state. Many Kansas farmers will then ultimately look to foreign markets, either in North America or abroad, to sell their products in the coming months. What argument would you make to a country that tries to restrict its imports of U.S. wheat or other products for food security reasons?
Well, in the first place, it's, as I said before, it's a legitimate argument should you use national security in the case of steel. I believe it's a legitimate argument. I, however, think that it's a legitimate use of the statute if the president decides to go in that direction. Steel, aluminum, these are national security issues, in my opinion. Now, there's always the argument, are you worried about somebody else using it? Yes, I'm worried about somebody else using it, but they have to have a legitimate reason also. They can't just willy-nilly use it, or we would challenge them. And my guess is that any country that thought they had a legitimate reason to use national security would, in fact, use it, whether we use it or not. I mean, that's my own personal belief. I don't see how someone could preclude Kansas wheat based on a national security of food, a food need basis. That doesn't strike me as a legitimate argument. If it certainly happened, we would have to decide what makes sense in our judgment. And I can assure you that the president will look at this very, very hard, and the reaction will be the same as we're going to have with respect to any time we take an action on trade at all. There's always the possibility of somebody retaliating against us. It even happens when you do something in anti-dumping or countervailing duty or all the normal things. There's always a possibility of retaliation, and the question you have is, what are you going to do in response? And that's something that we're thinking about. But if we get unfair retaliation against us, I would affect the president to act very strongly. I would expect him to take the position that we won't tolerate that.
Okay, great, thanks. About 50% of all U.S. grown wheat is exported, making trade incredibly important to a wheat state like Kansas. Mexico, for example, is the largest export market for U.S. wheat last year, made possible by the benefits of NAFTA. In fact, according to the National Association of Wheat Growers and the U.S. Wheat Associates, Mexico imported 3.1 million metric tons of wheat in the 2016-2017 marketing year. In the views of many of my constituents, NAFTA has been overwhelmingly successful. I do agree, however, there's room for updating in this agreement, which is more than 20 years old, to include strong and enforceable SPS rules based on sound science, like those that were negotiated under the TPP. Kansas farmers and ranchers are also looking beyond NAFTA to future trade deals for additional markets. What are your views on how NAFTA renegotiation can serve as a blueprint for securing those future trade deals, which would mean the inclusion of strong SPS provisions that will help the Kansas producers gain new market access?
Well, SPS is something that needs updating, and it's an important objective. Generally, there are advantages in putting in model agreements and negotiation between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. Because we have a long history, we don't have a lot of the some of the outlier economic activity that you might have if you were negotiating with somebody else. For example, we don't have massive state-owned enterprises in either place. So I think that NAFTA is, as you suggest, it's a great opportunity to put in place between the three countries very high-level provisions with respect to a variety of things. SPS is one of them, but there are also others. People have suggested currency. It was a kind of a classic example of what you're talking about, where there really aren't currency problems between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. But that makes it a good opportunity for everyone to sit down and say, okay, let's put together a model agreement here that ought to apply to everyone. So I look upon NAFTA as a real opportunity to create a model. And I believe that with respect to some of these things, the Canadians and the Mexicans look upon it the same way. And then take those provisions with the additional legitimacy of being in the NAFTA and be able to use those in future negotiations.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We look forward to working with you. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thanks.